The smell of bacon drifted through the Texas morning air. Not the thin, pale strips that soldiers sometimes got in field rations. Real bacon, thick cut, sizzling in cast iron skillets. The fat crackling and popping like a symphony of abundance. Fort Sam Houston, October 1945. American soldiers lined up in the mess hall laughing, joking, piling their plates high. With eggs and toast and those glorious strips of pork, the war was over. They had won, and breakfast had never tasted so good. But outside the mess hall, 71 Japanese women stood frozen in the dawn light. They were not laughing. A translator stepped forward, her hands trembling as she held a piece of paper. Official orders, military stamp, the words that would change everything. She read aloud in Japanese, her voice cracking on each syllable. Remove your shoes, oil your hands, touch them. 71 women stopped breathing. Every woman who survived capture knew what those words meant. Every woman who lived through the war understood what touch meant when men gave orders. This was it. This was what they had feared since the moment they were captured in the Philippines 3 weeks ago. The Americans had fed them, clothed them, transported them across the Pacific Ocean, and now the payment was due. Haruko Tanaka stood in the third row, 26 years old, chief nurse of Field Hospital No. 7. She had treated wounded Japanese soldiers for 3 years in the jungles of the Philippines. She had seen blood and death and horror beyond imagination. But she had never felt fear like this. Shinde mo sawarimasen, she whispered to the woman beside her. The words came out barely audible, but fierce. I would rather die than touch them. The translator continued reading. Medical massage, lymphatic drainage. Words that made no sense together. Words that sounded like lies designed to make the inevitable seem clinical. Massage meant one thing in war. Every woman knew what it meant, but something was wrong with this picture. Haruko looked past the translator, past the American officers into the building behind them. Through the open doors, she could see rows of beds, medical beds, and on those beds lay American soldiers with bandaged limbs, with wounds wrapped in gauze, with faces twisted not in lust, but in pain. Real pain, the kind she had seen 1,000 times in her own hospital wards. And beside the bottles of oil sat boxes of medical supplies, bandages, antiseptic, gauze, surgical tape. Why would they need bandages for that? The question flickered through her mind like a match in darkness, brief, uncertain, but enough to make her pause. A tall American officer stepped forward. He wore the insignia of the medical corps. In his hands, he carried not a weapon, not restraints, but charts. Medical charts covered in handwriting and diagrams. This man did not look at the Japanese women the way soldiers looked at conquered women. He looked at them the way a doctor looks at colleagues. Ladies, he said, through the translator, I will be direct with you. His name was Dr. William Harrison, 38 years old, Army Medical Corps, and he was about to explain something that would shatter everything these women believed about their enemies. We have 300 wounded American soldiers in this facility, he said. Infected wounds, gangrene, blood poisoning, injuries that have gone untreated for weeks in the Pacific jungles. He paused, letting the translator catch up. We have 12 American nurses, 12. They are exhausted. They have been working 18-hour shifts for months. They cannot save everyone. Haruko listened, her mind struggling to process. This was not what she expected. This was not the speech that came before assault. You are trained nurses, Dr. Harrison continued. I can see it in how you stand, how you observe, how your eyes went straight to the medical supplies when you entered this room. You have skills, skills that can save lives. He held up one of the charts. On it was a diagram of the human body with lines drawn in green ink, tracing paths that Haruko did not recognize. This technique is called lymphatic drainage massage, he said. It increases circulation, reduces swelling, and prevents gangrene from spreading. It is a medical procedure developed by American military doctors in the Pacific Theater. Haruko stared at the diagram. The green lines traced a network she had never studied in her nursing training. The lymphatic system, the hidden circulation that Japanese military medicine had never taught her. Without this technique, Dr. Harrison said, we will have to amputate 50 limbs per week. With it, we can save 70%. He looked directly at the group of Japanese women, not with contempt, not with hunger. With something that looked almost like respect. "I am asking for your help," he said, "not as prisoners, as medical professionals." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Haruko did not move, did not breathe. Her mind was racing through everything she had been taught about Americans. "They are devils," the political officer had said during training in Osaka. "They eat human flesh. They violate women and then kill them. They have no souls, no honor." She had believed it. For 3 years she had believed every word. But devils did not ask for help. Devils did not show medical charts. Devils did not explain lymphatic drainage techniques to enemy nurses. A new figure entered the room and Haruko almost laughed at the absurdity. He wore a cowboy hat, a genuine Stetson, cream-colored and well-worn. His boots were leather pointed at the toe, the kind she had only seen in photographs of the American West. When he spoke, his accent was thick and slow, like honey poured from a jar. "Howdy, ladies," he said, tipping his hat. "Name is Bobby Willis. I'm going to teach you how to save some lives today." This could not be real. Haruko was certain she had died somewhere in the Philippines, and this was some strange afterlife where cowboys taught massage to Japanese prisoners. Sergeant Robert Willis, 33 years old, medical instructor from Johns Hopkins University, though you would never guess it from his appearance. He had been a ranch hand in Texas before the war, had joined the Army Medical Corps, because, as he put it, horses and humans are not so different when they are hurting. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a wound on his forearm, still healing, still pink around the edges. "I'm going to demonstrate on myself," he said, "so you can see there is nothing funny going on here." He picked up a bottle of oil, held it up so everyone could see the label. Medical grade, antiseptic. The sharp clinical smell filled the room. Nothing like perfume, nothing like what comfort stations used. "This technique," Willis explained, "we developed it in the Pacific. Jungle rot, gangrene, blood poisoning. All that stuff was killing our boys faster than the enemy. We did not have enough doctors, did not have enough medicine. So we invented this." He began to demonstrate on his own arm. His movements were precise, deliberate, from far to near, following invisible channels, pushing fluid toward nodes that Haruko could now see on the diagram. It was scientific, methodical, medical. Nothing about it suggested anything other than healing. Haruko watched his hands move, rough hands calloused from years of ranch work. But they moved with the precision of a surgeon, the gentleness of a healer. "Your trained hands," Willis said, looking at the Japanese nurses. "They are exactly what we need. You already know anatomy. You already know how to touch sick people without hurting them. Now let me show you what American medicine can do with those hands." The demonstration continued for 20 minutes. Willis explained each movement, each pressure point, each pathway of the lymphatic system. He answered questions through the translator. He showed diagrams pointed to charts, referenced medical textbooks that sat open on a nearby table. And slowly and possibly, Haruko began to understand. This was real. This was actually happening. The Americans were not preparing to assault them. They were preparing to educate them. Why, she wondered. Why would enemies share medical knowledge? Why would conquerors teach the conquered? She would learn the answer soon enough. But first she would have to make a choice. Dr. Harrison led the group to the medical ward. The smell hit Haruko before she saw anything. Sweet and rotting, the unmistakable odor of gangrene. She had smelled it hundreds of times in her own hospital. It was the smell of flesh dying while the person it belonged to still lived. 200 wounded Americans filled the beds. Young men, most of them. Boys, really. 18, 19, 20 years old. Some missing arms, some missing legs. Many with bandages covering wounds that no bandage could truly contain. And there in the first bed lay Sergeant James Mitchell, 28 years old, from Ohio, a farm boy who had traded cornfields for battlefields and was now paying the price. His right leg was exposed from the knee down. The sight made Haruko's stomach turn, and she had seen horrors that would break most people. The flesh around his calf had turned black. Not dark, not bruised, but black. Dead black. The color of meat left too long in the sun. The edges were purple, transitioning to an angry red that crept upward toward his knee. Gangrene. Advanced. Spreading. Without intervention, Haruko knew the infection would reach his thigh within days, then his hip, then his organs, then his heart. He would die, or lose the leg. Those were the only options Japanese military medicine offered. But the Americans were offering something else. Dr. Harrison handed Haruko a bottle of oil, the same antiseptic oil that Willis had demonstrated with, the same charts, the same diagrams, the same instructions. Miss Tanaka, he said, you scored highest on the assessment we conducted during transport. You have the steadiest hands, the most experience, the best instincts. I want you to try first. Haruko looked at the oil, then at Mitchell, then at the black flesh consuming his leg. Please, Mitchell said. His voice was weak, strained with pain. Please save my leg. He did not know she could not understand English. He did not care. He was a boy in agony begging for help from anyone who would listen. And then Haruko saw something that stopped her heart. The patch on his uniform. The insignia of his unit. 3rd Marine Division. WWII Gulf. The world tilted. The room spun. Haruko grabbed the edge of the bed to steady herself. 3rd Marine Division. WWII Gulf. That was the unit. That was the battle. That was where Kenji died. Kenji, her brother, 24 years old. The boy who promised they would go home together, who dreamed of teaching at the elementary school near Sumiyoshi Shrine, who smiled even when everything was falling apart. 3rd Marine Division had killed him. 3rd Marine Division had destroyed his unit, ended his life, shattered every promise they had made to each other. And now a soldier from that same division lay before her, begging her to save his leg. Haruko stood frozen, the bottle of oil growing warm in her hand. She could refuse. She could let the infection spread. She could watch this American boy lose his leg, watch him suffer the way Kenji had suffered, watch him pay for what his unit had done. No one would know. No one would blame her. He was the enemy. He deserved whatever happened. Kenji's face flashed before her eyes. His smile. His voice. The last words he ever said to her. We will both go home. Just survive a few more months. He never went home. He died in the mud, in the blood, and the chaos of WWII Gulf. Because of men like James Mitchell. Haruko looked at Mitchell's face. Really looked for the first time. He was young, younger than Kenji had been. His eyes were blue-wide with fear, filled with tears he was trying not to let fall. He was trembling, not from cold, but from terror. Terror of losing his leg. Terror of never running again, never walking, never dancing with whatever girl waited for him back in Ohio. He looked like a boy. Just a boy. Like Kenji had been just a boy. Haruko closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw her brother one more time. Saw him smile. Heard him whisper words he had never actually said, but that she somehow knew he would say. Heal what war destroys. That is what you promised, little sister. She opened her eyes and she put her hands on the enemy. The first touch was the hardest. Her fingers met his skin, and every part of her screamed to pull away. This was wrong. This was betrayal. This was everything she had been taught never to do. But her training took over. Her hands knew what to do even when her heart resisted. She found the lymph nodes, felt the blockage, sensed the fluid trapped beneath the dying tissue. She began to work. The technique was new, but the principles were familiar. Pressure and release, movement and stillness, guiding the body's own systems to do what they were designed to do. Mitchell groaned, not from pleasure, from pain. The toxins were moving now, the infection shifting, the process of healing, beginning its brutal work. Haruko continued. 10 minutes, 20, 30. Her hands ached, her heart ached more, but she did not stop. And then impossibly, she saw it. The edge of the wound, the blackest part, the tissue that had seemed completely dead. It was changing color, black to purple, purple to a dusky pink. Blood was returning. Circulation was improving. The gangrene was retreating. She had never seen anything like it in 3 years of nursing. Dr. Harrison stood behind her, watching. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was warm when he spoke. Excellent work, Miss Tanaka. Excellent work. Haruko looked at her hands. These hands that had touched the enemy. These hands that had saved a limb that Japanese medicine would have amputated. These hands that had chosen healing over hatred. They were trembling. Not from exhaustion, from the weight of what she had just done. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She had touched an American soldier, worked on his body, saved his leg. And she had done it while knowing that his unit might have killed her brother. What did that make her traitor? A voice whispered in her mind. Eon Fu, comfort woman, collaborator. But another voice, quieter but stronger, whispered something else. Healer. Across the ward, something else was happening. Chio Sasaki, 23 years old, the youngest of the Japanese nurses, stood before a different bed, a different patient, a different choice. Private Daniel Collins, 19 years old, a farm boy from Kansas with wheat-colored hair and eyes the blue of summer sky. His right foot was black with gangrene, scheduled for amputation the next morning. He was crying. I do not want to lose my foot, he said, though Chio could not understand the words. I want to go home and run in the wheat fields again. I want to dance with Mary Ellen at the county fair. Chio looked at his foot, looked at his tears, looked at the terror in those blue eyes. She remembered what her father had taught her in Nagasaki. The old doctor who believed in invisible flows within the body and channels that Western medicine did not recognize. Perhaps the Americans had discovered the same things she thought, just in a different way. She began to work. Collins screamed when she found the right spot. Pus erupted from the wound, yellow and green and foul-smelling, but it was leaving his body. The poison was draining instead of spreading. The black flesh began to pink. Dr. Harrison rushed over, eyes wide. The foot is responding, he said. Cancel the amputation. Collins was sobbing now, not from pain, from hope. Thank you, he said to Chio, grabbing her hand. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She did not understand the words, but she understood the tears. And for the first time since her capture, she felt something other than fear. She felt powerful. That night, after the medical work was done, something unexpected happened. The Japanese women were invited to the mess hall, not as prisoners, as guests. Bobby Willis personally escorted them, his cowboy hat still firmly in place, his Texas drawl warm and welcoming. You ladies worked hard today, he said. Time to eat. Haruko entered the mess hall and stopped. She had never seen so much food in her life. Platters of bacon, crispy and glistening. Mountains of scrambled eggs, golden and fluffy. Toast with real butter, the kind that had disappeared from Japan years ago. Pitchers of orange juice, fresh, squeezed the color of sunshine. And something she had never seen before. Flat, round cakes stacked 3 high, covered in golden syrup. Pancakes, Willis said, noticing her stare. Best thing about America right there. He picked up a plate and began loading it with food. Bacon, eggs, pancakes, everything. Then he handed it to Haruko. She stared at the plate, at the abundance, at the impossible generosity. Why, she asked through the translator. Why give us this? We are prisoners. Willis tilted his head, genuinely confused by the question. Ma'am, he said, in Texas, we do not starve nobody, not even enemies. That is not the American way. He reached behind him and grabbed a glass bottle filled with dark liquid that sparkled in the light. Try this, he said, pouring her a glass. It is called Coca-Cola. Whole country runs on this stuff. Haruko took the glass. The liquid was brown, fizzing strange. She had never seen anything like it. She took a sip. The sweetness exploded on her tongue. The bubbles tickled her throat. It was unlike anything she had ever tasted. Sweet but not cloying, refreshing in a way that defied description. She took another sip, and another. Willis laughed, a warm sound without mockery. See, nobody can resist Coca-Cola, not even Japanese nurses. Haruko looked around the mess hall. Her fellow nurses were scattered throughout, sitting at tables with American soldiers and medical staff. Some were eating hesitantly. Others had abandoned caution and were devouring plates of bacon and eggs. And nobody was hurting them. Nobody was leering at them. Nobody was treating them like conquered women. They were just eating breakfast together. Enemies sharing a meal. Devils do not give pancakes to their prisoners, Haruko thought. Devils do not pour Coca-Cola for captured nurses. Everything she had been taught was wrong. The propaganda, the warnings, the terrifying stories about American barbarity, all of it wrong. But not everyone was ready to accept this truth. Fumiko Nakamura stood in the corner of the mess hall, arms crossed, plate untouched. 29 years old, surgical nurse from Mindanao. She had refused to participate in the medical training, refused to touch American bodies, refused to accept anything from the enemy. I cannot eat their food, she said when Haruko approached her. My husband died at Guadalcanal. My son is missing at Saipan. I will not accept kindness from the people who destroyed my family. Haruko understood. She had lost Kenji. She knew the weight of that grief, the way it had colored everything. But she had also seen Mitchell's leg change color. She had also tasted Coca-Cola. She had also witnessed something that contradicted everything she believed. Fumiko, she said gently, I am not saying we should forget what we lost. But look around you. Does this look like what we were told? Does this look like devils and monsters? Fumiko did not answer. She simply turned away. 3 other women stood with her, silent, resistant, choosing hunger over acceptance. Haruko watched them for a long moment. Then she turned back to her pancakes. She did not know who was right. She did not know what any of this meant. She only knew that the world was not as simple as she had believed. And tomorrow there would be more wounds to treat, more legs to save, more choices to make. But tonight she would eat bacon and drink Coca-Cola and try not to think about the letter from her mother that had not yet arrived. The letter that would change everything. The letter with only 3 lines. Do not come home. You touch them. You are dead to us. But that letter was still weeks away. And Haruko did not yet know that the most dangerous enemy she would face would not be American at all. It would be Japanese. 2,000 Japanese male prisoners were being transferred to Fort Sam Houston. And when they arrived, when they saw Japanese women touching American bodies, they would not see medical professionals. They would see traitors. They would see Fu. And they would make sure everyone in Japan knew exactly what these women had become. The countdown to destruction had begun. 6 weeks had passed since that first morning. 6 weeks of bacon and eggs. 6 weeks of Coca-Cola. 6 weeks of hands pressing into wounded flesh, pushing poison out, bringing circulation back, saving limbs that Japanese medicine would have amputated without hesitation. Fort Sam Houston had become something unprecedented in military history, a training center where former enemies learned American medical techniques, a place where Japanese hands healed American bodies, a strange pocket of peace in a world still recovering from the bloodiest war humanity had ever known. Haruko Tanaka stood in the medical ward reviewing the morning charts. 45 Japanese nurses had now been certified. Each one carried at least 5 different certificates: wound drainage, infection control, circulation improvement, burn care, rehabilitation therapy. Haruko herself had 12 certificates, more than anyone else. Her hands had saved 47 limbs in 6 weeks. Not a single patient she treated had required amputation. The Americans called it the Texas Miracle. Colonel Andrew Roberts, the camp commander, had written to Washington about the program. The numbers spoke for themselves. Amputation rates had dropped from 50 per week to 8, 0 deaths from infection among patients receiving massage therapy, estimated savings of $2 million in medical costs. Dr. Harrison walked through the ward each morning with a smile that grew wider every day. Bobby Willis taught new techniques with the same cowboy charm that had disarmed the Japanese nurses on that first terrifying morning. The medical staff worked together, American and Japanese, as if the war had never happened. But the war had happened, and its consequences were about to arrive. Haruko was massaging Sergeant Mitchell's leg when she heard the trucks, the rumble of engines, the crunch of tires on gravel, the shouted commands in a language she understood all too well. Japanese commands. Mitchell heard it too. His body tensed beneath her hands. They are here, he said, his voice tight. The male POWs. Haruko did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. She looked toward the window, toward the sound of boots marching in formation, toward the voices calling out in her mother tongue. 2,000 Japanese men. Officers and soldiers captured in the final battles of the Pacific. They had been held in separate facilities until now processed and documented and finally transported to Fort Sam Houston for long-term internment. 2,000 men who had not spent 6 weeks eating pancakes and drinking Coca-Cola. 2,000 men who had not watched American doctors share their knowledge with former enemies. 2,000 men who still believed everything the propaganda had taught them. And they were marching past the medical ward. Haruko saw them through the window. Ragged uniforms, hollow faces, eyes that burned with something between shame and defiance. These were men who had lost everything. Their war, their empire, their honor. All they had left was their pride and their hatred. Captain Hiroshi Takeda walked at the front of the officer column, 36 years old. He still wore his rank insignia, still carried himself with military bearing, still believed in an authority that no longer existed. His eyes swept across the camp, taking in the American flags, the well-fed soldiers, the comfortable barracks. His lip curled with contempt. Then his gaze reached the medical ward, and he saw. Through the open doors clearly visible from the road, Japanese women bent over American bodies. Japanese hands touching American skin. Japanese nurses treating the wounds of the enemy. Takeda stopped walking. The column behind him stumbled to a halt, confused by the sudden break in formation. Takeda stared, his face transformed. The contempt became disgust. The disgust became rage. The rage became something ancient and terrible, something born from a culture that valued honor above life itself. Iayanfu, he screamed. The word cut through the morning air like a blade. Comfort women. Prostitutes. Whores. Every Japanese nurse in the medical ward froze. Every American soldier tensed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Yogoreta Ona Takeda continued, his voice rising to a roar. Defiled women, you touch them, you serve them. You spread your legs for the enemy. He was walking now, breaking from the column, moving toward the medical ward with murder in his eyes. American guards shouted warnings, reached for weapons, but Takeda did not care. He had found something worse than defeat. He had found betrayal. You are dead to Japan, he screamed at the nurses. You are dead to your families. You are dead to honor. You are nothing but Iayanfu selling yourselves to survive. Haruko stood up from Mitchell's bedside. Her hands were still covered in medical oil. Her apron was stained with the fluids of healing. She had spent the morning saving an American leg, and now a Japanese officer was calling her a prostitute. Something broke inside her. Not her spirit, her patience. She walked toward Takeda, slowly, deliberately, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence of the ward. We are not Iayanfu, she said. Her voice was calm but still ran beneath every syllable. We are nurses. We are performing medical procedures. Takeda laughed, a harsh, ugly sound devoid of humor. Medical procedures, he spat. Is that what you call it? Massaging American bodies, touching their naked flesh. You disgust me. You disgust all of Japan. He stepped closer, close enough that Haruko could smell the sweat and dirt of weeks of transport, close enough that she could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes. Do you know what they will say about you when you go home? He hissed. Do you know what your families will think? Every village in Japan will know what you became. Every child will spit at your name. Haruko did not step back. She raised her hands, still glistening with oil. Do you see this? She asked. This is not perfume. This is medical antiseptic. Do you see that man in the bed behind me? 6 weeks ago, his leg was black with gangrene. It would have been amputated. Now look at it, pink flesh, healthy circulation, a limb saved. She took a step forward, forcing Takeda to retreat. That is what these hands do, she said. They heal. They save. They bring life where there was death. I am a nurse. I was a nurse in Japan. I am a nurse now. And I will not apologize for saving lives. Takeda stared at her with something approaching shock. Women did not speak to officers this way. Women did not challenge men. Women did not stand their ground against the righteous anger of Japanese authority. But Haruko was no longer just a Japanese woman. She was something new, something forged in the strange crucible of Fort Sam Houston, where enemies became healers and hatred gave way to hope. You think Japan will believe you, Takeda said, recovering his composure. You think your certificates will matter. I will write letters. I will tell everyone what you have become. Touch is touch. Enemy is enemy. You have chosen your side. He spat on the ground at her feet. Then Colonel Roberts arrived with 2 American guards. Captain Takeda, he said through the translator, Geneva Convention protects medical personnel, including enemy medical personnel, including women treating wounds. If you harass these nurses again, you will be placed in solitary confinement. Takeda was dragged away, still shouting curses, still promising retribution. But before he disappeared around the corner, he turned back one last time. I will write to Japan, he called out. Everyone will know. Everyone. The door closed behind him, but the damage was done. That night, 5 nurses stopped working. They gathered in the corner of the barracks, away from the others, arms wrapped around themselves, as if trying to hold together something that was falling apart. Takeda's words had done what American guns could not. They had broken something essential, something that connected these women to their homeland, their families, their sense of self. He is right, one of them whispered. What we do, how will we ever explain it? How will our families ever understand? My mother, another said. She would rather I die than touch enemy bodies. She would rather attend my funeral than welcome home a daughter, sir, who served Americans. Fumiko Nakamura stood among them, the woman who had refused to participate from the beginning, who had chosen hunger over breakfast with enemies, who had predicted this exact moment. I told you, she said to Haruko when the chief nurse approached. I told you Japan would not forgive. Touch is touch. There is no explaining it. There is no justifying it. We are ruined. Haruko looked at the five women, at their tear-streaked faces, at their trembling hands. She understood their fear. She felt it herself deep in her bones. Takeda was right about one thing Japan would not understand. Japan would not forgive. The country they loved would never welcome them back. But she also understood something else. You have a choice, she said softly. I will not judge you for whatever you decide, but I will tell you what I have learned in 6 weeks. She held up her hands. These hands have saved 47 limbs. 47 men will walk again because of what I did. 47 families will see their sons come home whole. That is real. That is true. That is something no letter from Takeda can take away. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her certificates. 12 pieces of paper stamped with the seal of the United States Army Medical Corps. This is evidence, she said. This is proof. Every certificate documents medical work, medical training, medical procedures. When they call me Ianfu, I will show them these, and I will tell them the truth, Ayame Suzuki. 20 years old, the youngest nurse to participate in the program, stepped away from Fumiko's group. Hokori Yori Ikiru, she said. Living is better than pride. She walked to stand beside Haruko. I choose to live, she said. I choose certificates. I choose a future. Japan may reject me, but I will not reject myself. One by one, others followed. Chio Sasaki, whose hands had saved Daniel Collins from amputation. Midori Hayashi, who had lost her entire family in Okinawa yet still chose healing over hatred. Noriko Yamamoto, the translator, who had bridged 2 worlds with her words. 35 women stood with Haruko. 5 remained with Fumiko. The division was complete, and both sides knew that the choices made this night would echo for the rest of their lives. The days that followed were darker. Takeda's influence spread like the gangrene they had learned to treat. The 2,000 male POWs were kept separate from the medical program, confined to different barracks, forbidden from approaching the nursing staff. But whispers carried further than guards could patrol. Ianfu, the male prisoners, called across the fences. Traitors, comfort women. Some of the nurses who had chosen to continue began to waver. The constant condemnation wore at them like water on stone. Every insult was a reminder of what waited for them back home. Every accusation was a preview of their future. Haruko worked harder. If words could wound, then results would heal. She pushed herself to exhaustion, treating patient after patient, earning certificate after certificate, building an evidence of legitimacy that no whisper could destroy. But even evidence could not protect against what came next. 3 weeks after Takeda's arrival, Haruko was assigned a new patient. She picked up his chart, noted the standard information, walked to his bedside. Then she saw the insignia on his jacket, 3rd Marine Division. Leyte Gulf, again, like Mitchell, like that first day when she had touched enemy skin for the first time. But this was different. This soldier was younger, 22, maybe 23. His wound was on his thigh, deep and infected, requiring extensive treatment. He would need weeks of massage, weeks of her hands on his body. His unit had killed Kenji. His unit had ended her brother's life, destroyed her family's dreams, shattered every promise they had made to each other. Haruko stood frozen, the chart trembling in her hands. Please help me, the soldier said. His voice was weak, desperate, terrified. I do not want to lose my leg. He did not know, could not know. To him, she was just a Japanese nurse with trained hands and medical certificates. He had no idea that his unit insignia was a death sentence to her heart. She could let the infection spread. Just a little. Just enough. No one would suspect. No one would blame her. He would lose the leg and she would have her revenge. An eye for an eye, a limb for a life. Haruko closed her eyes. She saw Kenji, not as he had been in life, but as she imagined him now, standing beside her watching, waiting to see what his sister would choose. She heard his voice, the last words he had ever spoken to her. "We will both go home. Just survive a few more months." He had wanted her to survive. He had wanted her to live. He had not asked her to avenge him. He had only asked her to come home. But home had rejected her now. Home had called her Ionfu through Takeda's mouth. Home had nothing left to offer. All she had was this ward, these patients, these hands that had learned to heal. "Kenji," she whispered too quietly for anyone to hear, "I cannot hate anymore. I have seen too much suffering. I have caused too little of it. Hate does not heal. Only hands heal." She opened her eyes and she began to massage the soldier's leg. The work was grueling, the infection was deep, the tissue damage was extensive. But Haruko's hands knew their craft, now knew the pathways and pressure points, knew how to coax life back into dying flesh. The soldier cried as she worked, from pain, from relief, from the strange miracle of enemy hands saving enemy limbs. He never knew. He would never know. Haruko would carry that secret for the rest of her life, the knowledge that she had saved a man whose unit might have killed her brother. But she would also carry something else. Peace. A small, fragile peace that bloomed in the darkness of her grief. The peace of choosing mercy over revenge. The peace of proving, if only to herself, that she was more than her hatred. Daniel Collins was walking again. His foot had healed completely. The gangrene that should have taken his leg was nothing but a memory. He could run, jump, dance. Everything the doctor said he would never do again. He spent every spare moment with Chio Sasaki. At first it was gratitude. He brought her flowers picked from beyond the fence, wildflowers that reminded him of Kansas. He brought extra portions from his meals, chocolate bars from care packages, small tokens of appreciation. But gratitude became something else. Chio Collins said one afternoon, sitting beside her during her break, "I know you cannot understand me, but I need to say this anyway." He took her hand, gently, the way you hold something precious and fragile. "I think I am falling in love with you." Noriko was nearby, translating quietly. Chio listened to the Japanese words. Her eyes widened, her cheeks flushed. She looked at Collins, at his blue eyes, at his earnest face, at the hand holding hers with such care. "Watashi mo," she whispered. "Me too." Collins did not need a translation. He understood the tone, the expression, the tears forming in her eyes. He leaned forward and kissed her. A Japanese nurse and an American soldier. Former enemies, now something else entirely. Haruko watched from across the ward. She had seen death and destruction, had witnessed the worst humanity could do. But she had never seen this. Love growing in the soil of hatred, hope blooming in the ashes of war. If love could survive what they had been through, she thought, then perhaps anything was possible. But hope was a fragile thing in Fort Sam Houston. And the letters from Japan were about to arrive. December 1945, the mail trucks came. For 6 weeks, the Japanese nurses had been isolated from news of home. Communication was slow, bureaucracy was slower, and the chaos of post-war Japan had delayed everything. Now finally letters arrived. Haruko received hers in a bundle, 4 envelopes with familiar handwriting. Her mother, her father, an aunt, a cousin. She opened her mother's letter first. 3 lines, just 3 lines. "Do not come home. You touch them. You are dead to us." Haruko read the words again, and again, and again. Her mother's handwriting, the woman who had taught her to write, who had sung her to sleep, who had wept when she left for the war. That woman had written 3 lines declaring her daughter dead. Around her, other nurses were opening their own letters. And the sounds that followed would haunt Fort Sam Houston for days. Weeping, wailing, the raw, primal sounds of hearts breaking. Noriko received news that her father had disowned her. He demanded she never use the family name again. Midori learned that her only surviving brother, the last connection to her destroyed family, had declared her no longer his sister. Ayame, the youngest, opened a letter from both parents. They did not ask about her health. They did not ask when she would return. They asked her to commit suicide, to restore family honor, to die correctly since she had not died in the war. 61% of the nurses received rejection letters. The statistics were cold. The reality was devastating. Takeda had kept his promise. He had written to Japan, and Japan had responded. These women were no longer daughters, sisters, wives. They were ghosts, worse than ghosts. They were shame-made flesh reminders of a war lost, symbols of honor abandoned. Haruko sat in her bunk, her mother's letter in her hand. She did not cry. She had no tears left. Instead, she reached for her box of certificates. 12 pieces of paper. Evidence. Proof. She placed her mother's letter in the beak beside the certificates. The evidence and the verdict side by side. Then she did something she had not done since Kenji died. She spoke to him. Kenji, she whispered into the darkness. I saved the enemy. I healed the men who might have killed you. Are you angry? Do you hate me? Silence. The barracks creaked in the Texas wind. Somewhere a woman was still crying. I remember what you said, Haruko continued. Someone has to heal what war destroys. That is what you told me. That is what made me become a nurse. She looked at the certificates. I have healed so much, brother. So many limbs. So many lives. American lives, yes. Enemy lives. But still lives. Still human beings who wanted to go home to their families. She thought of Mitchell, who visited her every day now, who brought flowers and practiced Japanese greetings and smiled whenever he saw her. She thought of Collins, who had fallen in love with Chio, who was planning to marry her and take her to Kansas, who proved that enemies could become more than friends. She thought of all the soldiers whose legs she had saved, who would walk again, run again, live again. Maybe that is the answer, she said to Kenji. Maybe that is why I had to survive. Not to avenge you, but to prove that compassion outlasts conflict, that hands can build what bombs can only destroy. She closed the box. That night, long after the barracks had fallen silent, Haruko slipped outside alone. The Texas sky stretched endless above her, filled with stars that did not care about wars or borders or broken hearts. The same stars that had watched over Leyte when Kenji died. The same stars that now watched a Japanese woman weep on American soil. She sat with her back against the wooden wall, drew her knees to her chest, and finally let herself break. Not the quiet, dignified tears that Japanese women were taught to shed. These were ugly sobs that tore from her throat like wounds reopening. She cried for Kenji, who would never come home. She cried for her mother, who had declared her dead. She cried for the girl she had been before the war, the girl who believed in simple things like family and honor and home. That girl was gone now, buried somewhere between Osaka and Manila and Fort Sam Houston. The woman who remained was something new, something harder, something that had learned to heal enemies while her own heart bled. She cried until her throat was raw, until her eyes swelled shut, until there was nothing left inside her but a hollow ache and the distant sound of Texas wind. Then she wiped her face with her sleeve, straightened her uniform, and stood up. Tomorrow there would be more patience, more certificates to earn, more evidence to build. Tonight she had earned the right to grieve, but only tonight. Japan has rejected me, she said. Mother has declared me dead. I have no home to return to. She stood straightening her nurse's uniform. But I have these hands, I have these certificates, and I have the knowledge that I have done good in the world. She walked to the window and looked out at the Texas night. Maybe America will accept what Japan has rejected. Maybe there is a future here in this strange land of bacon and Coca-Cola and cowboys who teach medicine. Maybe. Major Hamilton arrived in January 1946. He was a recruitment officer, 39 years old, with contracts in his briefcase and opportunities in his words. 38 positions available immediately, he announced to the certified nurses. Salary 5 times the Japanese standard. 1-year contracts renewable. Housing included. The occupation hospitals needed massage therapists. They needed trained hands. They needed exactly what these women had become. Miss Tanaka, Hamilton said, looking directly at Haruko. You have saved 47 limbs. You have 12 certificates. You are one of the best lymphatic drainage specialists we have ever trained. I do not care where you come from. I care what you can do. Haruko looked at the contract. Position senior lymphatic specialist. Location San Francisco General Hospital. Purpose treatment of civilian patients. San Francisco, America. A future that had nothing to do with Japan's judgment or her mother's rejection. She looked at her fellow nurses, at Chio, who would stay with Collins, at Noriko, who had already applied for a visa to New York, at Midori, who was planning to open her own clinic in Los Angeles. The women Japan had rejected America was welcoming. The irony cut both ways. Haruko picked up a pen. "I choose to live," she said, and she signed her name. 23 other women signed that day. 23 futures sealed in ink. 23 bridges built between former enemies. But the story was not over. 20 more years would pass before Haruko could open her own clinic. 20 years of proving herself, building her reputation, accumulating evidence that she was a healer, not a prostitute. 20 years of waiting for vindication. And when it finally came, it would come from the most unexpected source, the granddaughter of James Mitchell. But that is a story for another chapter. For now, Haruko boarded a ship to San Francisco with her box of certificates and her mother's letter. She carried both the evidence of her worth and the verdict of her shame. She did not know what waited for her in America. She only knew that she could never go back to Japan. The woman her mother mourned as dead was about to begin a new life. And the hands that had touched enemy bodies would touch thousands more, healing without hatred, saving without judgment, proving that the greatest victory is not won with weapons. It is won with mercy. 20 years is a long time to carry a box. Haruko Tanaka carried hers from Fort Sam Houston to San Francisco General Hospital, from a cramped apartment in Japantown to a small rental house in the Mission District, from employee to supervisor to department head, from 1946 to 1965. The box never changed. Brown cardboard slightly worn at the corners, sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. Inside lay 40 certificates, each one stamped with the seal of the United States Army Medical Corps. Each one evidence, each one proof. And beneath the certificates, pressed flat by years of weight, lay her mother's letter. 3 lines that had followed her across an ocean and through 2 decades. "Do not come home. You touch them. You are dead to us." Haruko was 46 years old now. Gray streaked her black hair. Lines traced the corners of her eyes, maps of smiles given and tears withheld. Her hands, once young and uncertain, had become instruments of precision, capable of sensing blockages and tension that other therapists could not detect. She stood before her clinic on a Tuesday morning in spring. Tanaka Physical Therapy. The sign was simple black letters on white background. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, just a name and a profession. But behind that simple sign lay something extraordinary. 3,000 patients treated, 50 therapists trained, a reputation that stretched from San Francisco to Los Angeles, from Seattle to San Diego. Doctors referred their most difficult cases to her. Medical schools invited her to lecture. The technique she had learned in a military tent in Texas had become standard practice across California. And no one called her Eon Fu anymore, at least not to her face. Haruko unlocked the clinic door and stepped inside. The waiting room smelled of eucalyptus and clean linen. Certificates lined the walls, not the old Army ones, but new ones. California state licenses, professional association memberships, awards for excellence in physical therapy. Each one was armor. Each one was a shield against the accusations that still whispered in her memory. Her first patient would arrive in an hour. A construction worker with a back injury, an ordinary case for an ordinary Tuesday. But this Tuesday would be anything but ordinary. The bell above the door chimed at 9:15. Haruko looked up from her paperwork, expecting her scheduled patient. A man stood in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and deep lines etched into a weathered face. He wore a simple jacket and held a bouquet of flowers in hands that trembled slightly with age. But it was not his appearance that made Haruko's breath catch in her throat. It was his eyes, blue-gray like storm clouds over the Pacific. Eyes she had seen before 20 years ago, filled with pain and fear and desperate hope. "Haruko-san," he said. The Japanese honorific sounded strange in his American accent, pronounced carefully, as if he had practiced it many times. James Mitchell. Sergeant James Mitchell. The first American soldier she had ever touched. The man whose legs she had saved on that terrifying first morning in Fort Sam Houston. He was 48 years old now. His hair had gone completely white. His face bore the marks of time and weather and a life fully lived. But his legs still worked. Both of them. He had walked through her door on his own 2 feet 20 years after doctors had scheduled his right leg for amputation. Haruko stood slowly, her professional composure cracked, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath. Mitchell-san, she said. They stood there 6 feet apart, separated by a reception desk in 20 years and a war that had tried to make them enemies. Then Mitchell smiled. The same smile she remembered from those long ago days when he had thanked her through gritted teeth, when he had brought her extra rations, when he had tried to learn Japanese greetings from the translator. "I found you," he said. "It took me 3 years of searching, but I found you." He stepped forward and held out the flowers. Cherry blossoms. Pink and delicate, the flower of Japan, the flower of her homeland that had disowned her. "Every year," Mitchell said, "on the anniversary of the day you saved my leg, I think about you. Every year I wonder where you are, what happened to you, if you are okay." He paused, his voice thickening. "This year I decided to stop wondering. I hired a private investigator. I searched records, followed leads, made phone calls. And I found you, here, in San Francisco, with your own clinic." Haruko took the flowers. Her hands were shaking. She could not remember the last time her hands had shaken. "You did not have to do this," she said. "I was just doing my job." Mitchell shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "You were not just doing your job. You were doing something impossible. You were healing the enemy. You were choosing mercy when you had every right to choose hatred." He looked down at his legs. "I went home on these legs," he said. "I married my sweetheart on these legs. I danced at my daughter's wedding on these legs. I walked my granddaughter to school on these legs. Every step I have taken for 20 years, I have taken because of you." Haruko felt something breaking inside her. Not pain, something else. Something that had been locked away for 2 decades, frozen solid by rejection and shame and the endless need to prove herself. It was breaking now, melting like ice in spring. Mitchell was not finished. "I know what they called you," he said quietly. "I heard the Japanese soldiers shouting with Ionfu. I did not know what it meant then, but I learned later. Comfort women, prostitutes." His jaw tightened with anger. "It was a lie," he said, "the worst kind of lie. I was there. I saw what you did. You were not selling yourself. You were saving lives. You were a nurse, a healer. The best I have ever seen." Haruko could not speak. 20 years of silence, 20 years of carrying that word like a stone in her chest, and now this American soldier was standing in her clinic, calling it a lie. "There is something else," Mitchell said. "Something I only understood years later." He looked directly into her eyes. "That first day when you started working on my leg, you stopped. Just for a moment. You looked at my uniform, at my unit patch, and something changed in your face. Pain, grief, something terrible." Haruko's heart stopped. "I did not understand then." Mitchell continued, "But I thought about it for years. 3rd Marine Division, Leyte Gulf. We were in some of the worst fighting of the Pacific. We lost good men, and he paused, struggling with the words. "We killed a lot of Japanese soldiers too." Silence filled the clinic, the kind of silence that holds its breath. "Did you lose someone there?" Mitchell asked gently. At Leyte, Haruko nodded. She could not trust her voice. "Who?" The word came out as a whisper. "My brother, Kenji. He was 24 years old." Mitchell closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I am sorry," he said. "I am so sorry. I did not know. None of us knew. We were just following orders, fighting for our lives, trying to survive." He took a shaky breath. "And you saved my leg anyway. You knew my unit might have killed your brother, and you saved my leg anyway." Haruko finally found her voice. "I did not save your leg despite what happened to Kenji," she said. "I saved it because of him. Because he wanted me to survive. Because he believed that someone has to heal what war destroys." She looked down at her hands. "If I had let you lose your leg, it would not have brought him back. It would have only added more pain to the world. More grief, more loss. And there was already too much of that." Mitchell reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm and firm, the grip of a man who had lived a full life because of her choice. "Your brother sounds like he was a good man," he said. "He was," Haruko replied. "He wanted to be a teacher. He wanted to go home and live in peace and help children learn. He never wanted to fight. Neither did I." Mitchell said, "I was a farm boy from Ohio. I wanted to grow corn and raise a family and never see another gun as long as I lived." He squeezed her hand. The war made us enemies, but you made us something else. You showed me that compassion can survive even the worst conflict, that the hands which save create bonds that bullets never could. They stood there for a long moment, two people who had been on opposite sides of history, now connected by something deeper than nationality or politics or the madness of war. Then the bell chimed again. Haruko turned to see a young woman entering the clinic, 17 years old with features that beautifully blended east and west. She had her mother's delicate bone structure, her father's blue eyes, and a quiet confidence that reminded Haruko of Chio. "This is Sarah Collins," Mitchell said. "Daniel and Chio's eldest daughter. She insisted on coming today." Haruko's knees almost buckled. Collins. Daniel Collins, the 19-year-old farm boy from Kansas whose foot Chio had saved. The man who had fallen in love with a Japanese nurse and married her against all odds. Their daughter was standing in her clinic. Auntie Haruko, Sarah said in perfect Japanese, "My mother talked about you all the time. She said you were the bravest woman she ever knew." Chio, Haruko whispered. "How is Chio?" Sarah's smile faltered. "She passed away last year," Sarah said gently. "Cancer. But before she died, she made me promise to find you. She wanted you to know that she never forgot you, that she named her first daughter after you, Haruko." There was another Haruko in the world, a half-Japanese, half-American girl carrying her name. "Mom always said that you taught her the most important lesson of her life," Sarah continued. "You taught her that love can survive war, that healing is stronger than hatred, that enemies can become family." She opened her purse and pulled out a photograph, a wedding photo, black and white, dated 1947. Chio in a white kimono, Collins in a formal suit. Behind them, a group of Japanese women serving as bridesmaids. And there in the corner, a younger Haruko, thin, tired, but smiling. "Mom had 4 children," Sarah said. "I am the oldest. I want to be a doctor someday. My younger brothers and sister, they are still in school, but Mom always said we would all end up in medicine. She said healing was in our blood now." She smiled. "Mom always said that the foot you saved in 1945 created a family of healers. 3 generations now. All because you chose to save instead of hate." Haruko took the photograph with trembling hands. 47 limbs she had saved in Fort Sam Houston. She had always counted them, always remembered the numbers, the statistics, the evidence of her work. But she had never truly understood what those numbers meant. Lives, families, generations. Collins had gone home on the foot Chio saved. He had married her, raised children with her, created a legacy that stretched forward through time. Mitchell had walked his granddaughter to school on the leg Haruko saved. He had danced at weddings, played with children, lived a full life because of one choice she made on one morning 20 years ago. The ripples spread outward, further than she could see, further than she could imagine. The bell chimed a third time. Haruko turned, expecting another patient, another ordinary case for an increasingly extraordinary Tuesday. An elderly Japanese woman stood in the doorway. She was perhaps 60 years old with silver hair, pulled back in a traditional style. Her face was weathered but dignified, her posture straight despite her age. And her eyes held something that Haruko recognized immediately. Grief. Old grief carried for a long time. "I am Takeda Yuki," the woman said in Japanese. "The wife of Takeda Hiroshi." The room went silent. Takeda, the captain who had called them Ianfu, who had spat at Haruko's feet, who had written letters to Japan ensuring that every family rejected every nurse who had touched American bodies. The man who had destroyed their reputations, stolen their homes, turned them into ghosts in their own country. His wife was standing in Haruko's clinic. "My husband died last year," Yuki said. "Cancer. It was slow, painful. He had many months to think before the end." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "Before he died, he asked me to find you. He gave me this letter. He said it was the most important thing he had ever written." Haruko did not move, did not reach for the letter. 20 years of anger and pain and vindication were rising in her chest, a tidal wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Yuki stepped forward and placed the letter on the reception desk. "I know what he did to you," she said quietly. "I know about the words he shouted, the letters he wrote, the lives he destroyed. I have lived with that knowledge for 20 years. She bowed deeply, the formal bow of sincere apology. I cannot undo what he did. I can only deliver his final words and beg for forgiveness on his behalf. Haruko looked at the envelope, looked at this woman who had been married to her tormentor, looked at Mitchell and Sarah who were watching in silence. Then she picked up the letter and opened it. The handwriting was shaky, the script of a dying man. Tanaka Haruko-san, for 20 years I have watched you from afar. I read about your clinic in Japanese American newspapers. I heard about your reputation from people who had been your patients. I saw you build something remarkable from the ashes of what I tried to destroy. I called you Eon Fu. I called you traitor. I called you every shameful name I could think of because I could not accept what you represented. You healed the enemy. You touched American bodies. You chose survival over honor. And I hated you for it. I hated you because you were brave enough to do what I could not. I hated you because you proved that mercy was possible, even in war. I hated you because you showed me that my definition of honor was too small, too rigid, too cruel. I was wrong. You were not a traitor. You were not a prostitute. You were not a disgrace. You were a healer, a nurse, a woman who chose life over death, compassion over vengeance, future over past. It took me 20 years to understand this. 20 years of bitterness and regret. 20 years of watching you succeed while I rotted in my hatred. I am dying now. The cancer has spread to my bones. I will not see another spring. But before I go, I need you to know I was wrong about you. You were right about everything. Healing is stronger than hatred. Mercy is braver than revenge. The hands that touch enemies can build bridges that bombs can only destroy. I hope somewhere in your heart you can forgive a foolish old man who took too long to see the truth. Takeda Hiroshi Haruko read the letter twice, 3 times. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. 20 years. 20 years of carrying the weight of his accusations. 20 years of proving herself again and again and again. And now finally the man who had condemned her was asking for forgiveness. She looked at Yuki, who was still bowing, still waiting. I forgave him long ago, Haruko said. Not for his sake, for mine. Because carrying hatred is like carrying poison. It does not hurt the person you hate. It only hurts yourself. She set the letter down beside her mother's letter, still in its box after 20 years. Tell me, she said to Yuki, did he find peace before the end? Yuki straightened, tears streaming down her face. Yes, she said. After he wrote that letter, something changed in him. The bitterness left his eyes. He stopped talking about the war, about honor, about all the things he had lost. He started talking about his grandchildren, about flowers, about the small beauties of life. She wiped her eyes. I think writing to you freed him. I think admitting he was wrong allowed him to finally let go. Haruko nodded slowly. Then something good came from it, she said. Something good came from all of it. She looked around her clinic, at Mitchell standing with his flowers, at Sarah holding her mother's photograph, at Yuki delivering her husband's apology, enemies and accusers, patients and orphans, all gathered in one room connected by choices made 20 years ago. The bell chimed one final time that morning. A young woman entered, 18 years old with blonde hair and blue-gray eyes. She wore a college sweatshirt and carried a notebook. Haruko recognized those eyes immediately. Mitchell's eyes. This is Emily Mitchell, said, stepping forward proudly. My granddaughter. She just got accepted to medical school. Emily approached Haruko with a mixture of nervousness and determination. My grandfather has told me about you my whole life, she said. He said you saved his leg. He said you taught him that mercy takes more courage than revenge ever could. She took a deep breath. I want to be a doctor, and I want to learn from you. I want to understand how you did it, how you healed enemies, how you chose mercy when you had every reason to choose revenge. Haruko looked at this young woman, 18 years old, the same age Haruko had been when she first entered nursing school in Osaka before the war, before Kenji died, before everything changed. Do you know the full story, Haruko asked? Do you know that your grandfather's unit might have killed my brother? Emily nodded solemnly. Grandfather told me. He said that is what makes your choice so extraordinary. You knew and you healed him anyway. Haruko smiled. It was not a sad smile. It was the smile of someone who had traveled a very long road and finally reached a destination worth reaching. Sit down, she said. Let me teach you about lymphatic drainage. Emily sat, Haruko took her hands and positioned them correctly. Proximal to distile, she said, always toward the heart. She guided Emily's hands through the motions, the same motions she had learned from Bobby Willis in that tent in Texas, the same motions she had used on Mitchell's leg, on Collins's foot, on hundreds of American soldiers, and thousands of civilian patients. The technique passes from hand to hand, Haruko said, from enemy to enemy, from generation to generation. That is how healing works. It does not stop at borders. It does not recognize nationalities. It only recognizes need. Emily practiced the movements, her young hands learning the ancient art of touching, without harm of pressing, without pain of guiding the body's own systems toward health. A cowboy named Bobby Willis taught me this technique, Haruko said, in a military tent in Texas in 1945. He wore a Stetson hat and boots with pointed toes, and he spoke with an accent so thick I could barely understand him even through the translator. She laughed softly at the memory. He said something I have never forgotten. Knowledge is not political. Medicine is not nationalist. Healing transcends borders. She looked at Emily. He was right. And now I am passing that knowledge to you, the granddaughter of the first man I ever healed. The circle is complete. Emily noticed a photograph on the wall behind Haruko's desk. A man in a cowboy hat grinning at the camera, standing beside a group of Japanese women in nurse uniforms. Is that him? Emily asked. The cowboy who taught you. Haruko's eyes softened with old sorrow. Bobby Willis. He died in 1952. Car accident on a highway outside San Antonio. He was only 40 years old. She touched the photograph gently. He never knew what his teaching created. Never saw the clinics, the students, the thousands of lives saved. I wrote to his family after she'd heard. Told them what their son had done. His mother wrote back. She said Bobby always believed that kindness was the only weapon worth carrying. Haruko smiled through the memory. He was right about that too. That evening, after everyone had gone, Haruko sat alone in her clinic. The cherry blossoms Mitchell had brought sat in a vase on her desk. Beside them lay 3 letters. Her mother's rejection, Takeda's apology, and a new one she had written that afternoon. Dear Mother, I do not know if you are still alive. I do not know if this letter will reach you. I do not even know if you will read it. But I need you to know that I am well. I own a clinic in San Francisco. I have healed thousands of people. I have trained 50 therapists. I have built something good and lasting and true. I am not what you thought I was. I was never what Takeda said I was. I was a nurse, a healer, a woman who chose to save lives rather than end them. Today, the granddaughter of a man I healed came to learn from me. Today, the wife of the man who condemned me delivered his apology. Today, I finally understood that the choices I made 20 years ago were not just about survival. They were about showing the world what healing can do. You called me dead, but I am more alive than I have ever been. I forgive you, Mother. I forgive you for those 3 lines that broke my heart. I forgive you because I understand now that you were afraid. Afraid of shame. Afraid of what the neighbors would say. Afraid of a world you did not understand. I hope wherever you are, you have found peace. I hope you know that your daughter became something worth being proud of. I love you. I always have. I always will. Your daughter, Haruko. She sealed the letter and set it aside. Then she opened her box of certificates one final time. 40 pieces of paper, yellow with age, but the stamps were still clear. The signatures still legible. The evidence still valid. She had carried this box for 20 years. Carried it like armor, like proof, like a shield against accusations. But she did not need it anymore. The truth had spoken for itself. The results had proven her right. The lives she had saved, the families she had created, the generations she had influenced. That was her vindication. Not paper and stamps and official seals. People. Living, breathing people who walked on legs she had saved. Doctors and nurses trained in techniques she had taught. Grandchildren who would never know war, but would know healing. Haruko closed the box and put it away. Then she walked to the window and looked out at San Francisco, at the city that had become her home, at the country that had accepted what Japan had rejected. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Cherry blossom petals drifted on the evening breeze. Somewhere out there, Mitchell was having dinner with his family, telling stories about a Japanese nurse who had saved his legs 60 years ago. Somewhere out there, Sarah Collins was teaching her own children about their grandmother Chio, about love that transcended war, about enemies who became family. Somewhere out there, Emily Mitchell was studying anatomy, preparing to become a doctor, carrying forward a legacy of healing that had started in a tent in Texas. And somewhere perhaps Kenji was watching. Haruko liked to imagine him smiling. "You were right, brother," she whispered to the sunset. "Someone has to heal what war destroys." She had spent 20 years doing exactly that, and she would spend whatever years remained doing the same. Because healing had no nationality, medicine had no enemies, and hands were made to save, not to destroy. That was the lesson of Fort Sam Houston. That was the truth that Takeda had finally understood. That was the legacy Haruko would leave behind. Not certificates and stamps, not vindication and proof, just healing. Endless, borderless, unstoppable healing. The sun disappeared below the horizon. Stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over Texas in 1945, the same stars that had witnessed the birth of something extraordinary. Haruko turned off the clinic lights and went home. Tomorrow there would be more patients, more hands to guide, more lives to save. But tonight she would rest. Tonight she would finally stop carrying the box. Tomorrow and every day after she would carry something lighter. Hope. 3 words had haunted 71 Japanese women in 1945. Massage their bodies. They had thought it was a death sentence, a final humiliation before the end. Instead, it was a beginning, the beginning of healing, the beginning of forgiveness, the beginning of a legacy that would stretch across decades and continents, touching lives that had not yet been born. Haruko Tanaka died in 1995 at the age of 76. More than 200 people attended her funeral. Former patients, colleagues, students, Japanese and American old and young, united in grief and gratitude. James Mitchell was there, 78 years old, walking slowly but walking nonetheless on the legs she had saved 50 years before. He placed a single cherry blossom on her casket. "She saved my leg," he told the gathered mourners. "But more than that, she saved my soul. She showed me that enemies are only enemies until someone is brave enough to heal them." He paused, gathering himself. "I was a farm boy from Ohio. I thought I knew what courage was. I thought it was charging into battle, facing enemy fire, fighting for your country." He shook his head. "I was wrong. Courage is what Haruko did. Courage is healing someone whose people killed your brother. Courage is choosing mercy when hatred would be so much easier. Courage is spending your life proving that love is stronger than war." He looked at the casket, at the woman who had changed his life with her hands. "Thank you, Haruko-san. Thank you for everything." The funeral ended. The mourners dispersed. But the legacy continued. Emily Mitchell became a surgeon. She specialized in trauma, in putting broken bodies back together, in saving limbs that others would have amputated. She kept a photograph on her desk. An old photograph, black and white, showing a young Japanese woman standing in a medical tent in Texas. Whenever a case seemed impossible, whenever a patient seemed beyond saving, Emily would look at that photograph. And she would remember what her grandfather had told her. The enemy is only an enemy until someone is brave enough to heal them. Then she would scrub in, take up her instruments, and honor the legacy she had inherited. From a cowboy in Texas who believed in sharing knowledge. From a Japanese nurse who chose mercy over revenge. From a grandfather who walked on legs that should have been amputated. 3 people from 3 different worlds connected by a single truth that America's greatest strength was never its weapons. It was its ability to turn enemies into allies. To offer second chances, to believe that every person deserved the chance to heal and be healed. Because that is the American way, not the bombs and bullets and battles. The healing, the hope, the hands reaching across enemy lines not to harm, but to help. That is what makes America great. That is what 71 Japanese nurses discovered in a military tent in Texas in the autumn of 1945. That is what Haruko Tanaka spent her life proving. And that is what we must never forget. The story ends here, but the healing continues. It always does.